But I wanted so the two things taken that I'm most interested by always are politics and the media and political media. So you kind of sit in both of those spaces. So let's first can you let's do politics first, then we'll do media, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
I like this is my favorite question. Where are we now? What do you make? So we are now 30 days into Donald Trump's presidency. I counted 30 days. What do you make of? Are you surprised? Let me ask it this way: are you surprised or unsurprised by the first 30 days?
That's a great question. I am only surprised by one thing. Though there's one thing that I got wrong. I pretty much thought that with 4 years out of the White House, that Trump was going to spend a lot of time thinking about how he was going to do it differently. And so when he won the election, it really seemed like the team was much more up to speed than they were back in 2016. That transition then was really kind of haphazard. They got into the White House. They didn't do a lot. They weren't really sure of what they were doing. They didn't understand where the bodies were buried, where the levers of power were. I thought that would be different. The one thing I definitely got wrong, however, was when they talked about this Department of Government Efficiency, headed unofficially, I guess, by Elon Musk. I thought it was going to be one of these blue ribbon panels that we've seen in the past that the president puts together. They come up with all sorts of ideas for cuts and efficiencies in government, and then it just dies on the vine because no one in Congress wants this.
Right.
I did not foresee what Elon Musk has done over the last 30 days. This has been an extraordinary time. It's different than anything we've seen, and we're not really sure what the ramifications of it all are, but it's pretty fascinating to watch.
It's so funny. So I was watching, and then I went through the transcript of the interview in the least restrictive sense of that term. Because Sean Hannity, I've read so many of Hannity's interviews with Trump, and he's always like, man, a lot of people are saying you're great. What do you make of that? You know what I mean? So it's like, you got to kind of take it with a little bit of a grain of salt there. But I guess interview technically. And I was just thinking, golly, this is crazy because there are parts of that interview where, first of all, it's weird that Trump is co-interviewing with anyone, right? Just given who Trump is, right? I mean, he's a spotlight hog, like most politicians are. But so that was weird in and of itself. But there are times where it's like it's just Hannity talking to Elon. Like Hannity is just interviewing Elon, and the president of the United States is just kind of like, which is wild. Like, I mean, for any president, but definitely for a president like Donald Trump, right? I mean, like with his sort of approach to the world and what he thinks of himself. And it just struck me like, wow, like this is so weird. And I totally agree with you. I thought the Doge thing, first of all, it was basically like an Elon Musk lark. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, this is funny because it's an acronym that says Doge. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like Elon Musk has long pined to make the government more efficient. And it was like Elon and Vivek Ramaswamy at the start, and I was like, oh, nothing's gonna come of this. And you're right. I mean, it has very rapidly become I think it is the story of the first 30 days of the Trump presidency, right? So a third of the way to 100 days, it feels like the story. And the thing I don't know is like, what do you think the next 30 days of Trump and Musk and Doge look like? Is it similar? I mean, is it just going systematically through all these departments and cutting people? Like, is it more of the same?
So I actually don't think the cutting people is the main objective here. I think the main objective here after 30 days so cutting people is not the objective. Um, Finding efficiencies is not really the main objective. I really think it's all in the data. I think the fact that the data that they are gathering and the data that Musk is, according to reports, loading up into his AI software is really the goal here. And I think they're going as fast as they possibly can because they know that the privacy implications of that are tremendous and they don't want to get shut down until they get as much as they possibly can. So in some ways, I actually think a lot of the firings that we've seen, some of them I think are shiny objects to get people to
Mm,
chase, and
hmm
that's not really the real point. Now there will be job cuts. A lot of these provisional employees will be cut or never, not hired ultimately, and so there will likely be some cost savings there. But that's not really where I think the power of this is.
So, but
Donald
taken
Trump has
to
never.
the data, to what end? I guess, like, why the data?
Okay, so I wrote a piece today for my subscribers, which kind of gets into that, which is one thing that political reporters didn't notice this week, but it was Elon Musk has an AI company called XAI.
Yep,
XAI has released a new model called Grok 3.
I saw it.
According
Yep,
to according to experts who have seen Grok 3 operates at least as well as any of the other large language models out there. So that includes Google Gemini, that includes ChatGPT. Many people think it works better. Elon Musk claims it works much better. But what's remarkable to me is that Elon Musk did this in just 19 months. Okay, that the XAI was founded 19 months ago. These other companies have been around much, much longer.
yep,
And he did it with a massive, massive server complex in Memphis, Tennessee, that he had built. So he did have the advantage of having, this massive amount of computing power to put towards this. But I think what it also shows is that with all of these language models, what they're all kind of being trained on the exact same data. It's the data that's publicly available to all of us on the internet. It's just that
hmm
computers can scour it and make sense of it a lot faster. What I think is unique about where Elon Musk is right now, and the reason that he wants this data is that I think first of all, it's non-public data, which means that XAI could create a model of Grok 4, Grok 5, whatever it is, that is vastly superior to anything else out there because it's being trained on reams of data that are not publicly available.
absolutely.
Connections can be made between various pieces of data that they've already scoured the internet for. And I really think that from Elon Musk's point of view, he sees, first of all, from a technological point of view, it helps him build it helps him leapfrog to the front of the pack for AI, which I think he has an interest in. But with Donald Trump and with Elon Musk, I think they see power in that. And I think that Donald Trump is you wonder why Donald Trump sits there silently when Elon Musk is giving a press conference in the Oval Office or when he's sitting next to Hannity.
Yep,
Um, he's doing it because I think he realizes that Elon Musk is the key to an awful lot of power, and that Elon Musk can unlock an awful lot of power for him. What I don't think Trump realizes is that Elon Musk can unlock an awful lot of power for Elon Musk too. And that will be interesting to see where that tension plays out. So far, they're both on the same page. They both seem to have aligned interests. That may not always be the case, though.
right. I mean, I think inevitably it won't be, but the question is when. I thought one of the things that was, as you were talking, that I was thinking about in the Hannity interview is Hannity, and again, Hannity is not exactly like really pressing them on the issues of the day. But Hannity says something like, "Well, what happens if Elon has a conflict of interest?" And Trump is like, "Well, he'll just recuse himself." And I'm like, "What? Like formally? Like how?" I mean, that's the thing that's so interesting is like, I remember back in the day, a president, for example, particularly one even close to as wealthy as Donald Trump, there would be huge pressure to put all of his money and investments in a blind trust. So he would be unaware of all of that stuff. Well, that's not even part of the conversation anymore. And not
No,
only that, but we have the world's richest man who is diversified across AI, social media, electric cars, space, drilling.
I know.
He probably has other companies that I haven't
I
named,
mean,
but the point is, this is a guy who's diversified across all these things, which the federal government, of course, the American government, of course, has huge leverage and regulatory power over. And most Republicans certainly, I haven't seen any sort of Republican good government people saying, "Oh, tut tut, this is bad." And yet,
No,
if George Soros, just as an example, if George Soros was suddenly Barack Obama's chief advisor and was doing co-interviews with Barack Obama, you know, I mean, I think that it would be outrage, and I would say, probably justifiably so, if the way that was the oversight capacity was basically, well, Elon, if he's conflicted, he'll say something and step away. It's like,
yeah.
really?
Well, if there was a headline out of that interview last night, it was the most shocking thing to me. I mean, most of it was boring. There wasn't a whole lot of news that came out. As you said, it
Yes,
was,
love fest.
it was asking Donald Trump. Everybody thinks you're great. What do you think of that? And stuff like that.
Right.
It's not really the most hard hitting interview, but there was one thing that struck me as pretty interesting, which was when Elon Musk was asked what his job was. He said it's to enforce the president's executive orders,
Yep.
which is really a sign of weakness in a way of Donald Trump. What do you mean? Donald Trump, you're the president of the United States. You can't enforce your own executive orders. And instead, Elon Musk was playing the role of enforcer, and Donald Trump is letting him.
Yep.
I found that fascinating
And
because,
and Trump went back to it after Elon talked about it and said, a lot of times I sign executive orders and they don't follow it. So Elon has to go over there and say, you're doing this or else, which is like totally fascinating. Again, I'm fascinated by Trump's psyche. Like, how does he see himself?
yeah.
And he always sees himself as, he's always telling himself a story where he's the best and the hero and the victor. But what's interesting to your point is like, he's essentially saying, well, I'm the president, but even though I sign these executive orders, it's not a guarantee that I get what I want. So that's why we have Elon Musk.
So if you're a betting man, I mean, you see, you look at everyone else who's worked with Trump, and at some point there's an expiration date. Trump
Yes.
Trump turns on them, and what do you how do you think this will play out, and what is the time frame? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the world we live in now, the time frame of everything is sped up. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, I just, like, if you said like how long until anything happens, I would say, I whatever my thought would be, I would guess half that amount of time, just because it just feels like everything moves so fast, particularly political news cycles. I They seem to me to be ultimately not compatible because they're too similar. They're both, and I don't mean similar in style because they're not. Like,
Yeah.
even if you watch that interview last night, Elon is like trying to be sort of like funny and self-deprecating, and Trump is neither funny nor self-deprecating. Like, Elon says something about, Handy said, "Do you want to die on the moon?" And Elon says, "Yeah, but not on impact, on Mars." On Mars. And Elon
Yeah.
says, yes, but not on impact, which I was like, that's funny. I mean, I'm sure he said it before, but that's funny.
Yep.
But Trump doesn't have that in him, right? But I mean, like, who they see themselves as, they are the alpha, right? They are the person, they are the prime mover. They say stuff and it gets done. And I think Elon will probably get bored
Yeah.
at some point because, he has all these different companies. Because he gets bored, he moves on to this next thing, doesn't, I mean, which is fine. And Trump, I think it will grate on him over time. I
Yeah.
just, he is not a spotlight sharer, not with
Well,
his vice president, not with other Republicans, not really with anyone. And I am surprised. I mean, I'm a little bit surprised that they did that Trump agreed to like a sit down interview with Elon Musk. He's the president.
it's
You know what I
amazing.
mean? It was like, it reminded me of when Ron DeSantis announced his campaign on Twitter.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a disaster, but in that Twitter live thing with Elon, and I was like, this is your one chance to be like the guy, and you're gonna share it with Elon Musk. Like, it just seemed like a weird choice. It's kind of the same thing to me. Like, I'm surprised Trump did agree to do that, but I just think ultimately Trump cannot. Trump is the prime actor. Trump is the guy who the light is on, right?
Yep. Yep.
He's not a sharer of
Yep.
that. Never really has been. it's fine if the role is clearly subjugated to him. I always think of The Apprentice. It's like, yeah, there were other people. There was that guy, that old guy George or whatever at the table, and he would like tell Trump what he thought. But it was clear, like, these people work for me, right? And I'm the boss. And the Elon relationship is a little bit different because of his wealth, because of his celebrity, because of his, his influence internationally. And so I tend to think, I always compare it to like two piranhas in a bowl. You know what I mean? Like at some point, their nature is going to come out and they're going to fight. But, when, golly, if in a year we're talking about Elon Musk and Donald Trump's bromance, I guess I'd be really surprised.
Well, there's this interesting thing when they clarified what Musk's role was in the government was that he was this temporary employee,
Yes,
which
not the
which
head of Doge.
and not the head of Doge either, that he was simply an advisor in the White House, but temporary, unpaid temporary advisor. Um, I guess there's a limit on that position to 6 months. And so maybe we've already seen month number one, and maybe there's only 5 more months, and maybe Trump is going to wait this thing out. And or maybe Elon will bore a bit more quickly, or he will have gotten the data that he needs, or they will have announced, they will have gotten the savings, the savings that they've booked so that they can pass the tax cuts a little bit more easily. It'll be interesting to see if he lasts. What I was surprised about in the Hannity interview, as well as that press conference in the Oval Office, was if you took a stopwatch and you measured the time that each of them spoke, Elon Musk was the dominant person in
Absolutely.
those interviews. I mean,
Yep.
at one point, I think you said it earlier, is that Hannity is interviewing Elon Musk and Trump is just observing it. Yeah, I mean,
Which
it was
is just
fascinating.
remarkable. I mean, I feel like I feel like there are so many things that Chris Cillizza of 15 years ago would be like, "Holy shit," that happen like pretty consistently. That it's challenging, right? Because I think of my kids, right? They're 15 and 12. The dominant political presence of their entire lives is Donald Trump. I
Yeah.
mean, like, yes, Biden was president. Yeah, like, of course, I am aware of that. But like the dominant, if I said name a politician, they would name Donald Trump. So it's like, it's hard to go back to. I mean, it's so funny. I remember. I think we're both old enough to remember this, but I remember in the 2000 campaign, one of the dominant storylines was George W. Bush, Al Gore. What's the difference?
Right.
Now, obviously, we learned that, but like to go back to that compared to where we are today, it feels like 100 years. It feels different. It feels different in kind. And the other thing too is it feels like, and this is the thing I grapple with in terms of analysis all the time. It's like it really does feel like the rules are different. Like things that in 2006 would have been disqualifying are like a tweet now.
Yep.
Like it's. I find it challenging to kind of determine, okay, what's a mountain, what really matters, and what's like, we can ignore that.
Well, I'm old enough to remember when Douglas Ginsburg was denied a seat on the Supreme Court because he smoked a joint. So,
I mean, it's crazy. I do these calls with paid subscribers, and I did one right before I got on, and the guy had one question. He says, "When did character stop mattering in politics?" And it's a really, I said, I'd love to dispute
yeah.
that's not true, but it's hard for me to. I mean, I think if we went up to the average voter on the street and said, "Does character matter?" They'd be like, "Oh, of course." But if you look at like the actual results,
Yeah.
it suggests to me it wouldn't. I mean, if you asked Elliot Spitzer and Andrew Cuomo, should they have, and Al Franken, should they have resigned when they did, given the allegations, they would say absolutely not. No, let's wait it out.
Well, they would. That's which brings it. That's actually interesting because do you think that Donald Trump has actually a better ability to navigate these scandals than than an Elliot Spitzer does? Maybe Elliot Spitzer was always doomed, and it seems that for the first time, some of his appointees. You remember Tom Price in the
Yep,
first term was
yep,
not able to hang on to his cabinet
yep.
position. It was too much.
Ryan Zinke.
Ryan Zinke,
Yep.
yeah, things happened, and that Trump's aura wasn't able to keep them. I mean, either he got scared and pushed them out, But when you look at the confirmations of the people he's gotten confirmed
Yep.
from the US Senate, I mean, the aura is going beyond Donald Trump. It's now going to people close to him, and if he wants them, people are falling right in line. I mean, you think about some of the people that Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins ended up voting for,
Yep.
and I mean, you would not have predicted that 5 years ago.
I think it is remarkable. One of my favorite like little notes about the current Republican Party is one senator, one of the 53 Republican senators voted against Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And it's not Bill Cassidy in Louisiana. It's not Susan Collins. It's not Lisa Murkowski. It's not Todd Young, right? It's not any of the. It's Mitch McConnell, right?
Mitch
Like
McConnell.
it's
You would have
pretty
never predicted that.
right? It's pretty remarkable. I agree. I mean, I think in some ways, I don't. To answer your question, I don't know if he sort of like he gives you blanket protection if he's for you, but you're absolutely right that there's clearly a different dynamic. If Donald Trump, let's say that in late 2016, early 2017, as he's putting his cabinet together, let's say that Donald Trump says, I want Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be HHS. I want Pete Hegseth to be at Defense. I want Tulsi Gabbard to be at DNI. I want Kash Patel to be at FBI. I don't think all four of those people make it, right? Even if it's
Yeah.
a 53 seat Senate, Republican Senate, which it wasn't at that time. But I don't think all those people make it. I think the takeover of the Republican Party now, 8 years on, is so complete that, and the fear of people who privately, Republican elected officials who privately roll their eyes, the fear of Trump's political power and ability to kind of end your political career if he wants to is so profound that there's more willingness to get in line. So I don't know whether it's like the advise and consent piece of it has shrunk or his aura has gone up or both, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't ultimately sort of matter because the end result is he's going to lose one cabinet pick, Matt Gaetz, which he
Right.
lost in 8 days, right? Gates was the nominee for 8 days as AG. And other than Biden, I think that might be the fewest in at least a couple decades. They usually lose two, three, sometimes four. For him to lose one, given who he picked, is a pretty remarkable. I mean, I would not have guessed that. I would have guessed two, honestly. I would have guessed two people, Gates obviously, and then one of Gabbard, Hegseth, and Kennedy wouldn't make it. But that's not the case.
Well, when you talk about the times in which we've lived, I mean, you and I have both been doing this for a couple of decades. Donald Trump has been a dominant political figure now for about 10 years.
Yes,
And that's a long time. And before that, he was a dominant cultural phenomenon. There are very few people who had a hit television show for a decade or more. You could probably count them on one hand.
absolutely. The
And he
Simpsons and Donald Trump.
exactly. I mean, exactly. So Homer Simpson for cabinet. Yeah,
Exactly.
that'll be the next one. But that's a remarkable feat, and that's how when you talk about your children only really knowing this era of Donald Trump, I said after his first term to my own children who are a little older than yours, I said, I think it's going to take about a generation. And this is with the assumption that Trump wasn't coming back after January 6th. I think it's going to take about a generation before in order to reverse what Donald Trump's impact on the culture. Now, now
It's
I
so
don't know if it's
profound.
I don't know if it's possible. It's certainly not possible in our lifetimes,
No,
but
I
it's
agree. I think that people I I think we're still so close to it. I know it's been 10 years, but we're still so close to it. I don't think we realize the profound changes, both in terms of like what we expect. Forget what he's actually doing in office, right? Like what it means for our global alliances, like with China, Russia, Europe, Canada, Mexico. I just mean impact on like American culture.
yeah.
What do we expect in terms of behavior from a president? Um, uh, like, what are the sort of what does leadership look like? What should political parties behave as? I mean, again, the Republican Party, like I always say to people, go back to 2012. It's not that long ago. In 2012, Mitt Romney was the Republican presidential nominee, and Paul Ryan was the vice presidential nominee. In a 12-year period, those two people were not only moved to the side, they were forced effectively out of the Republican Party. These are not two sort of rank and file members. This is the presidential nominee and the vice presidential nominee. That change of how he has changed the Republican Party, how the Democratic Party has reacted to Donald Trump. Like I totally agree. I think even if he did nothing in office, which we know he's not going to do nothing, I think it would be profound. And the other thing that I want to talk about too, and I'll use this as a segue to get to it, the media and the political media and how Trump has changed that. So tell me, I want for people who don't know your story as well. And by the way, Taegan Goddard writes Political Wire, politicalwire.com, as well as which just go politicalwire.com, bookmark it. Trust me, it will keep you up to date on anything and everything you need to know every day in politics. And he writes Politics Extra on Substack, which you can follow and I will link to. Tell me about your process because you've been in the kind of independent creator space pre-Trump, and then obviously now both post-Trump and then Trump again. Like, tell me about the political media space, particularly not being affiliated with like a big legacy media company. How has that been, and has it changed with Trump?
It's definitely changed with Trump. So I have been running Political Wire for 25 years, of which the last 17 has been my full-time job. So I've been doing it a long time. And the goal of Political Wire, to those who aren't familiar with the site, is it's a place where you can go to find out what I think is important in politics right now. So the site is literally updated 24/7. It's unlike a newsletter in the fact that you kind of want to keep it in a web browser tab,
That's what
and
I
then
do.
kind of go over to it, hit refresh, and see what happens. But how it's changed is for most of that period, every 2 years I'd get a surge of traffic, in the 4 or 5 months before the election, before the national elections, because it's mostly a national site, although I do
Hmm.
cover state stuff. I get a surge of traffic, and then the election would happen, and the traffic would fall a little bit, but then it would plateau. And the beauty of it as a business is that it would plateau at a higher level than the previous 2 years.
Right.
So
Yep.
each election, more and more people would discover Political Wire, and it would plateau. What happened with Trump in 2016 is the plateaus stopped, and the line just kept going straight.
Interesting.
And it kept going straight because, and you wonder why Donald Trump won in 2016 and then again in 2024. It's that he brought more people into the process. He
Yep.
didn't win by changing the minds of people who voted all the time. He won by bringing more people into the process, and a lot of those people discovered Political Wire and then keep reading it, and they realize that the site is just a place where you can find out what's going. And the other thing is that with Trump on the scene for much of the last 10 years, even during the Biden presidency, he was in some ways more visible than the president himself. It was just he is constantly in your attention span, and there are,
Yes.
and so, but what is the challenge? That creates a great challenge because you can't just put up every ridiculous thing he says, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
you have a fantastic feature in your newsletter where when Trump gives a speech or a press conference, you go through and choose the most outrageous lines from the
Yep.
press conference. And if you were to focus on every single one of those things as a story, you'd never do anything else.
Nope.
So you kind of have to pick and choose. So, as we record this today, the 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 thing that Trump said today was he called Zelensky a dictator.
Yep.
Okay. That's going to be the headline tonight. That's going to be what people are talking about tonight because he is trying to, as you said in your piece this morning, he is rewriting history. He's
Yep.
trying to change the history, just as he did with January 6th. He's changing the history of the Ukraine Russia war. And Zelensky's now a dictator who, and somehow Vladimir Putin is in good graces, and the United States is treating him like any other world leader. It is a remarkable turn of events, but that's something worth focusing on. I'm not sure about the other things he said today, but fortunately, the political news media is beginning to learn what to focus on. It's not perfect and it's hard, and I really don't blame reporters because so many times there's something he says or there's a story out there that is so outrageous relative to what we're used to that you report on it because it is there's an interest, there's a value to that, but the difference is it's not always important. What he says is not really what necessarily what he does. I think that this dictator comment that he made today is important because it follows up on these meetings in Europe and in
Absolutely.
Saudi Arabia. This is a big deal. But I think from what you and I have to do is we need to filter,
And how do
filter through
you
that.
totally agree? That's my basic pitch for as long. I mean, I've been doing this something similar. I did something similar to this at the Washington Post. I did something similar at CNN. Now I'm doing it on my own. My view essentially is like, I'll be like your concierge, or I'll be your cruise director. I'll be like, that restaurant's not that good. You definitely should go here. Like that show's not worth it. Like I will tell you, like you should look here and explain why I think that, but
Yeah.
also inevitably in that is you shouldn't look over here. How do you like what's your process? Is it gut? Is it just sort of experience? You've obviously been at this a long time. How do you decide? The way I think about it a lot of times, the metaphor that I mentioned this earlier, but I think of mountains and molehills, right? If we treat everything like a mountain, and there are plenty of content people who do this, who make everything Trump says a gigantic deal, hair on fire, 11 out of 10, democracy is ending tomorrow. If we treat everything that way, it starts to lose its meaning. If everything's a
Yeah.
mountain, then the mountain doesn't mean anything. But how do you go about distinguishing, okay, this is a mountain, Trump dictator calling Zelensky a mediocre comedian and a dictator. I'm not sure which one will insult Zelensky more. Uh, this matters, but by doing that, you're of course saying like these other things matter less. Like, how do you go about doing that on a daily basis?
So when I started Political Wire, I actually thought that this was something that ultimately could be completely automated. I really thought that I kind of I'm an amateur computer programmer as well, and I thought you could put together programs to be able to cull the news in a way that made sense and that you could surface things that were important and things like this. Turns out that that might be possible someday. It's not possible now, and I've been waiting for that for 25 years. But what I do is I do use that to surface news that I think is important, and there's a secondary layer to that, which is I look closely and I have these scripts that I've written which pay attention to people who I think are very important and incredible and what they're doing on social media. And so I pay a lot of
Interesting.
attention. I pay a lot of attention. Like if someone I respect shares something on social media, it doesn't mean that one person isn't necessarily a flag that that's good. But if seven people that I respect are doing the exact same thing and are sharing that same
Yep.
link, then all of a sudden it pops up to this list that I have. It pops up and it's something then I go look at, and then I use my own judgment to decide, is that worthy of putting on Political Wire? What's happened during the Trump years is that that list churns a lot. There's an awful
Yes.
lot of stuff that goes, and so you really do have to stay on top of it hourly to really understand what is happening. And and I will say over the last 30 days, with Donald Trump back in there, the Steve Bannon flood the zone. It is working. It is very, very hard to keep track
It
of what is happening.
I struggle. I still remember. This is so funny. I went to roll call newspaper when I was 26 ish, mid 20s, and I remember we published three newspapers, actual print newspapers a week on Capitol Hill, and the internet was barely a thing. And I remember waking up so many mornings stressed out, like feeling in the pit of my stomach, like, oh man, like what am I going to write about today? And now that feels like it is the challenge now is the exact opposite of that.
Yep.
It is not what am I going to write? It is in truth, what am I not going to write about? And am I making a um, am I making the right assessment there, right?
Yep.
Like, am I trying to be sort of authentic to what I do think matters? I mean, one thing that's hard with all the analytics that Substack and everybody else has now, it's like, well, I kind of know that if I write something like, "Hey, Donald Trump sucks," well, a lot of people are going to like that, and I'll get more subscribers. But like, I don't really just want to do that, right? I want to be a journalist. I want to try to hold both sides to account. So it's a very hard in some ways, the more information we have, the harder it is. But I think
Definitely.
the allure of knowing, or at least being able to know, like, okay, well, when I do something like X, it really works, and when I do something like Y, it works less well on the business side versus the capital J journalism side was not when I first started a thing. We didn't have the analytics to do it. I mean, you had no idea. It'd be like someone sent a letter to the editor. That was like the extent of like engagement that you got. I want to can we spend 5 last minutes talking about you're someone who's been in this a lot. I know a long time like me, and you're someone who I think thinks about this stuff. Where are we headed? Where is the political media headed? In 5 years, what does the political media look like? You have thoughts on that? I'm mostly asking for myself selfishly.
Chris, that's going to be a hard one. That's going to be a hard one. So let me go back to when I was in college, and when I was in college, this was I'll show my age. This was pre-internet, pre World Wide Web. What we did have is I fell in love with the Wall Street Journal when I was in college, and every Friday morning, I used to get the Wall Street Journal on my doorstep, and I would look at the right hand column. It was called Washington Wire.
Of course.
In Washington Wire, I devoured it every Friday morning before I got to class. I thought it was the most clever, best journalism feature I'd ever seen. And what it was these little nuggets of things from the Wall Street Journal's Washington bureau that didn't really make their reporting during the week, but were interesting nonetheless. And
Yep.
I just thought that was fascinating. That's what I based Political Wire on. That's why, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to, first of all, not because I don't work for the Wall Street Journal, I wanted to broaden it to all media because on the internet you can link to all media. I always wanted to link to the source. And the other thing is, I didn't want it to just be Washington because there are really great political stories that happen elsewhere. The New York City mayor right now, that's a
Yes.
fascinating
Yep.
story. And so I wanted, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to recreate that feeling that I had when I was in college, and I used to just look forward to reading that column. And so today, when I look at Political Wire, I don't really look at the analytics. I don't really look at what works. I really go back to that basic thing, and I try every morning when I get up, I try to put together a website that excites people that same way because
Hmm.
they're like, wow, this is I would not have seen that 17th paragraph in the Wall Street Journal story, but Taegan put it up on the site.
Yep.
And thank goodness he highlighted that because I was never going to get through that entire story anyway. And I try to recreate that feeling. So when you ask me to look to the future of what journalism is, I hope that we have more people, I hope we have more people who do exactly that, you know, you and I both had influences on us. I know we both had Charlie Cook as a big
Yep.
influence on us.
Yep.
And Charlie Cook would write his newsletter and you would see him talk and you would get excited about what he did because he was producing something that no one else was producing and it was fascinating.
Yep.
And that's what I'm hoping. I do know that one of the most exciting things that's happened is something that you've embraced, which is the idea that a platform like Substack can come along and can allow so many people to have their own voice. I mean, I've seen you do it over the
Yep.
last couple of years.
Yep.
The one who's done it most recently has been Paul Krugman.
Yep.
Paul Krugman, not a morning goes by. I mean, Paul Krugman was going to be cut down to once a week at the New York Times.
Yep.
Krugman's like, None of that. Now he's writing literally 7 days a week, it seems, because every morning I wake up and I see something from him, and I have to tell you, 6 out of those 7, I learned something really interesting.
I it's so interesting because like I actually, you know, when CNN laid me off, which was like the end of 2022, people would say to me all the time because they have to say something. So they would see me and they'd be like, "You know what? This is going to be the best thing that ever happened to you." And I never said this, but in my head I thought, "Fuck you." Like that like that's total bullshit. Like, unless you have a job with healthcare to give me, like, don't tell me that. Like, I get it. It's like at a funeral. You got to say something, even though you know it's not particularly comforting. But I actually, looking back now, about 2 years on, I actually think, man, it is if CNN had laid me off 8 years ago rather than 2 years ago, I don't know that I would have had these outlets where I could be like, you know what, I'm going to start a Substack and just see where it goes. I'm going to start making YouTube videos and just see where it goes. Like, yes, there was like, you know, there were a few early kind of ideas of this. Patreon might have existed then, you know,
Yeah.
but Medium existed, but it didn't have the kind of like velocity and the pickup that you see now. So it's actually sort of a blessing because I got kind of cast into this independent creator world at a time when there actually were technology and platform that existed, to your point, where a Krugman can be like, and I don't think this is his calculation, but my guess is honestly, Paul Krugman makes more money now than he did when he worked in the New York Times. I guarantee you, Jen Rubin makes more money with the Contrarian than she ever made at the Washington Post. And Acosta may make more money with his thing in 3 weeks than he made at CNN. Now, it's not just money, but the point is, it's like, if you're a journalist, yeah, I always say, I don't go to the bank and the guy says, "What do you do for a living?" I say, "I'm a journalist." He says, "I don't worry about your mortgage this month." Like, you still got to pay, right? It's still a job. And so the financial piece is a real consideration. And I think the fact that these things exist now
But I
is,
have to say, you must feel this. I mean, we haven't talked about this, but I'll bet you feel more alive than ever right now.
there's just, you know what it is? I think a lot of people, the story that a lot of like people who have left mainstream or legacy media, whatever you want to call it, is like, they wouldn't let me say what I wanted. I never had that. Like Jeff Zucker, Marty Barron, these were my bosses at the Washington Post and CNN. They were totally like, do whatever you want. For me, it's more like when you work for one of those big outlets, if the captain of the ship decides he or she wants to turn it,
Yeah.
they tell the deputy captain. Then he or she tells the next person, next person, next person. By the time it gets down to the guy who's like throwing the coal and I don't know if this still exists. This is my image of ships is the Titanic, which may not be great, but you know, shoveling the coal in. By the time that happens, it takes a long ass time to turn.
Yeah.
Whereas, like for me, I'm like a little boat now. I can be like, for example, I'm like, I want to do more Substack lives. I think collaboration is critical, both as a superpower of a site like Substack, but also to expose people who follow you to me and people who follow me to you. And so I'm like, I want to do more Substack lives. So I just reach out to people and like, hey, you want to do this? You know, like
Yeah.
there's no, it's not like more free, but it's a hell of a lot more frictionless. If that makes, maybe it's a distinction without a difference, but there's no corporate bullshit, which is really nice. Like if I wanted to do this when I was at CNN, if you were
Yeah.
like, hey man, I'd love to get together with you, like can we just do like a live on something? Doesn't even have to be Substack. I would have had to go to my direct boss and then also to the PR people, and
Yeah.
they would have to be
Yeah.
like, well, okay, like what are you gonna say? And we're gonna need to have someone on this to kind of monitor it. You know what I mean? Like, because it's a big company. I get it. It's a big company. They have to protect their brand interests, right? I'm just a cog in that machine. Now I'm like, yeah, I want to do this, or I want to talk on this podcast, or I want to give this speech. Just go do it. And that piece is like on a day in day out lived experience level makes it a lot better. Like
But it's
for
like it's
me.
like what I was it's like what I was saying. The thing that delighted me back when I was in college was that it wasn't the Wall Street Journal itself. It was that one column on Fridays.
Yep.
It was so consistently good. What platforms like Substack and or YouTube or other platforms, just the web in general,
Hmm.
is that what they provide you is they provide the ability for anyone to create that product
Yeah,
that delights you, you know?
that's
And
it.
so I have readers who open Political Wire in their browser and then they just hit refresh and
Yep.
it's there for months and they just keep going to it and hitting refresh. And to me, that's the greatest thing in the world is because they're excited about that, you know, or I will say sometimes these days they hit refresh and then they cringe to wonder what's coming next.
Well, I will say I am one of the people who keep it. I'm literally, I have it on a tab. Now, I will tell you, I am one of those people who keep like 15 tabs open. I'm not one of those people who's like just one, but
Yeah.
of the 15, first of all, like five are Substack. So take those out. You are always one of them on Political Wire. So thank you for making the time. For everyone who joined, do me a favor. You can do two things. Go to politicalwire.com. Trust me, bookmark it if that's still a thing you do, or just keep it open in a tab. If you care about news and politics, the thing that I like about it is anyone can just put a list of 1,000 stories that come out. But Taken is sort of moderating it, filtering it, telling you through his lens. These are the things that matter, as he talked about. And that to me is the real value add now in the content world because there's just too much. No one can consume all of it. We all need help, right? We all need a trusted, I always say you don't have to trust everyone, but you need a few trusted people you can lean on and be like, I trust their judgment. I think they're fair. I like their perspective. I like the stuff they're flagging. And for me, Tagan is one of those people. So go to politicalwire.com. You also can find him on Substack at Politics Extra. Tagan, anything else that you can plug before we say goodbye?
Not at all, Chris. You're very kind to say that, and I hope we can do this again because it's a lot of
Absolutely.
fun.
I am a big believer in, especially in this independent space, we have to stick together and collaborate. That's if we're all siloed off, it doesn't serve us, and it definitely does not serve the reader, viewer, watcher, whatever you want to call them. Right? The sum is greater than the parts, and I always think. I mean, one of the things I like about these things is I learn stuff and think of things and think of ideas and make connections in conversation that I wouldn't just sitting here looking at my computer screen. So selfishly, it's really useful to me. So thank you,
Yeah.
my friend. Take good care. Everyone go politicalwire.com. Just go to it. Trust me. You can send me your thanks later, but you will be thankful. All right, Ted, take care, man.
Chris, thank you so
You
much.
bet.
Bye bye.
All right, bye.